One of the famous structures or the paths is called the Philosophers Walk, and I think this platform here is the end of the Philosophers Walk, and it's a long straight terrace that runs right the way back to the house, and it's called the Philosophers Walk. It was named by the family because that's apparently where Ada Lovelace and Charles Babbage wandered discussing the designs for the computer. So it's here. You know, there's a direct line of descendancy from all our mobile phones to what went on here in the 1840s. And to me, it's just a tragedy that the whole place is not as recognised as some other historic sites. I mean, this is just absolutely remarkable. And you can see that the vegetation growing out of the structures and the crack in the wall over there is just, it's a bit of a shame that it's not more widely recognised. But you know, that's where we are, but it's just such a really important site based on the surveys. So this path is the redirected southwest coast path, which then continues up behind Rupert there. So we're now on National Park Authority land. That's the boundary, so that's Lord Lytton. The entrance to the tunnels, that's Lord Lytton as well. And yeah, so these tunnels extend right the way down into the formal garden, and just round the corner there, they are complete. They're blocked up, but they are complete with their roof. And we think it was probably just a kind of bit of a kind of whimsical element to the garden, that you can almost imagine Ada and William entertaining guests in the garden, entering one of these tunnels which have got a deliberate bend on them, so you simply can't see from one end to the other. So you'd enter these dark tunnels and then emerge into this kind of landscape here with the views out over the Bristol Channel. So it would have been quite a remarkable thing, and that was clearly their intention to kind of awe people with the ruggedness of nature. And these are some of the kind of picturesque principles, I think, and somebody might be able to tell me more about the picturesque principles. So I'm kind of verging off my area of knowledge here. But that's certainly the elements that Ada built into her designs here, were to appreciate the kind of ruggedness of nature through kind of the improvement and beautification of some of these areas. So these drives were laid out at that time, and probably about 18 months ago this was just completely obscured. It was very, very dense cherry laurel, pretty much as you see behind you there, and we undertook to clear that cherry laurel. It was a huge piece of work, but it did reveal these old early 19th century carriage drives. And this middle section here, although it's now the landslip has severed the drive, this one did work its way right the way back up the hill, went up through Yarner Farm, and eventually went right the way up onto the A39. So this was quite likely one of the main access routes down into Ashley Coombe. The coast redwood here, for example, that was completely obscured. We could just about make the top out, but stood here, there was no evidence that this coast redwood existed. Something like correctly, but I think these were introduced in about 1840 something. Yeah. So that's probably within the Lovelace period, but there's no mention of it in the plant schedule that we've got here, which goes certainly up to the 1840s. There's no mention of Douglas fir or coast redwood, but this certainly feels big enough to be one of the early introductions. But it may well be after Ada's period, but William did continue to do planting and landscaping here. Arbutus, cypress, laurel and bays were planted in 1799. Species such as Bermuda cedar, possibly Bermuda juniper, but I don't know if that would ever have survived here. We've certainly found no evidence of it. Luckham oaks, Pinus lanceolata, which I have interpreted as Cunninghamia lanceolata, which is the Chinese fir, which again there's no evidence of, but certainly as we do work around the perimeter of the gardens, we're looking for these species and we'll record them as we find them. A lot of the pines listed here have survived, but we'd certainly like to reintroduce some of these species as we go around doing some of the restoration work. The National Trust have got big plans. We're trying to support other landowners to create more woodland, to connect these areas of woodland up and create a much more kind of nature-rich, better connected, more productive landscape, providing all those different kind of services.
Graham made contact a couple of years ago, Graham?
Yeah, it must have been.
With this, I thought, visionary project. And I use that word carefully because it was looking at the wider landscape about grey squirrel control. What can we actually do? RFS members have talked about grey squirrels for years and commissioned some really good work going back to Professor Ken Wood and others. So I was asked to go for a walk, which was rather nice, and to look at the various woods from Horner, probably which is the other side of Porlock, right the way through to Lee Abbey and Headley Valley, which is quite a long way that way. There's about 5 or 6 landowners, and then we did a top-up survey of the bits in between. Now the sort of thinking really was that here we've got a large track of woodland, sea on one side, an open moor on that side, and a bit of a block at each end. So there really is an opportunity to have a concerted effort to control greys. So the first thing was to actually just establish how many greys or what was the density. Now, and thereby we hit one of the first sort of big hurdles. So a little bit further on, you've got a sort of 300-acre wood, and you can stand on the top, and about 300 feet below you is the sea. And the 300 acres are literally like that. So how do you assess that? Well, with great difficulty. Drones were used and what have you. And one of the things that we looked at, we didn't use, but we looked at in America, they use thermal imaging drones, and they can pick out mice, would you believe it? So we started to think about how we might be able to use one of those, and literally you fly it out over the sea, turn the camera around, it faces the woodland. Because of the nature of the woodland, much of it is, use this carefully, pure, good morning, pure sessile oak, and it's one of the largest chunks of sessile oak in Britain, I would think. There's bits in Ireland, there's bits up in the west coast of Scotland, but it is pure sessile oak, and only when I was going through the woods could you actually see the hybridization. For example, most of Horner is hybrid, and I think, it's quite interesting that damage on pedunculate oak, yes, you see lots of damage on pedunculate oak, but I did not see any damage on sessile oak, and there is a document coming out about all this as and when I can ever get it ready to go, but it is there, and you'll understand what I'm talking about. Sessile oak, I think, is a good one, linked with cherry and small leaf lime and various other bits and pieces. European walnut is another one. So we surveyed all the woods, surveyed what damage we could see. We looked at the various methods of control that were available to us. Suffice to say that we're probably going to have to use a bit of a menu of methods of control, from box traps to some of the maybe pine martens in some of the inaccessible areas, maybe a bit of air gun shooting. There's a whole range of things. Access is very, very tricky. This is, dare I say, one of the easier bits. There are some bits that are really quite grim, in a nice way.
Yeah,
challenging, shall we say. One of the other things that I was asked to look at was how suitable are these woods for red squirrels, because it's within sort of somebody like William Theed's lifetime. He can remember red squirrels in this area, And my father, as he trained as a land agent on the Honeycutt estate, he remembers them, but he's sadly no longer with us, but I do remember talking to him about it a couple of years ago. The woods are diverse. There's lots of understory. There's quite a lot of hazel, and maybe the planting of hazel might be encouraged. I think it would be quite good for red squirrels, quite honestly, and it would link in with the Cornish group and maybe some others within the peninsula. So it's looking at this whole landscape approach. That's why I thought it was a visionary project to get stuck into.
We do continue to manage these woods. The point was made earlier about how we get some of the timber off, and it is quite difficult. We have harvested quite substantial volumes of timber over the last few years, and there's a bit of a schedule just on page 4 of your document there. So just a list of products that we've harvested from here, and between 2017 and 2019, 538 metres of timber from this end of Yarner Wood. Most of it was from one of the higher levels where access onto the toll road is a lot easier, and it is actually quite difficult, as you appreciate, to get timber from here. We have our own timber haulage tractor and timber trailer that we operate. We tried to get some of this timber previously from here, and they struggled to get up that slope. It just would not go up the slope. So we've got Philip Farmer in, who's got a different kind of kit. He's got a tractor-mounted crane. So the crane is on top of the tractor. It probably gives it more traction, and he was able to get out of here with a full trailer of timber. So it is possible, but it is difficult. Higher up, it's a much easier route out onto the toll road, and most of the timber listed in here came out that way onto the toll road. We got into a little bit of trouble with Lord Lytton. We were a little bit over enthusiastic and probably overused the toll road and caused a bit of damage, and he wasn't too pleased about it, but he was fine in the end, and we managed to talk to him and repair the road for him. Yeah, I think in future we'd probably do it more gradually, little and often, rather than an intense kind of harvest of quite significant volumes of timber. And we had good help from our neighbours on the Lillicombe estate. We used their timber loading area at the top, and then it went onto wagons and was hauled off from there. And we did quite well. I was really pleased that we were able to sell some sycamore, chestnut and oak to Warren Hughes Furniture in Tiverton. And that picture on the schedule there is actually some of our timber milled up at Tiverton, ready to be used in their furniture factory down there. And I had an opportunity to have a look around and see some of the work that they do there. And it's really, really interesting. So it's a really nice kind of story to be able to have sold timber to a local high quality end use. So we're really pleased about that. But we're also able to get some 50 metres of chestnut, this kind of material, to a local farmer who bought it specifically for clefting for chestnut stakes, and that was really, really gratifying to be able to do that. This timber here has been thinned from this immediate vicinity here. We had a company called 3 Top Woodland Services, a local contractor with a hydraulic clefting tool, and they've produced these timber stakes for us, and we'll use these on a woodland creation project that we've got on our land as well. So we're planting 15 hectares of new woodland, and we're going to use these stakes for the fencing around that new area of woodland. So that's another kind of really nice way of demonstrating that kind of circular virtual circle of managing woodland, using our own timber, using timber to protect newly planted woodland, which is another really nice kind of way of demonstrating the importance and value of managing woodland.
Did they point these with a table saw or with a chainsaw?
Chainsaw, oh. Yeah. So they're really nice. I've got some videos of it, so if anybody wants to see it and share it, I'm very happy to do that. But they had a tractor lifting the timber from the stack onto their bench where it was clefted, lifting it off, pointing it and stacking them.
So it's a really nice little production process, and all that went on while the footpath remained open. So people were walking through, seeing this process taking place, and you know, they commented on it. We're pleased to see timber being harvested and being converted in this way. Yeah, we were going to talk about invasive species. We covered grey squirrels and reintroductions. These woods, like many of the coastal woods, were absolutely full of rhododendron. There were hectares of rhododendron pretty much from one end to the other, as were Glenthorne Woods, as were the Porlock Manor Estate, as were Bernard's Woods, and a huge amount of work has been carried out clearing the rhododendron from here. We've been working with a contractor here, part of our countryside stewardship scheme, continuing to mop up the rhododendron, but you know, it's still here in little pockets. But yeah, 25 years ago, this would have looked very different. It was pretty full of rhododendron, cherry laurel. We've also got buddleia and that Himalayan honeysuckle, which is now also becoming a bit of a problem, but we're also managing to keep on top of that. So yeah, invasive species, not just grey squirrels, but rhododendron and cherry laurel as well, have been a big problem for us.
We've got Yarner Wood, we've got Culbone Wood, we've got Embell Wood, and then we've got the cliffs. So you know, that area down there is so unstable that we don't go anywhere near it. The contractors clearing the rhododendron go so far, and then they make an assessment about how far, you know, when to stop. Anything else is kind of rope access, so they'll stop at that point. But yeah, it's like I think one of the farmers described the geology here as kind of Weetabix on a tray. You know, you tip it up, and the whole lot just slides away, and that happens periodically. What you often see as a bit of a precursor to some of the slips is that the track will drop by 6 inches, and then you can trace a bit of a line. And Tim has done this. He's gone up with a drone and managed to kind of trace areas where he predicts there might be a major landslip at some point in the future. But what do you do? I mean, I don't know how we just either keep away from this place completely, or we just try and work around it. You'll have noticed that we've now moved out of that kind of improved stand. We're into the old sessile oak coppice here. When the wartime felling took place, I think they must simply have concluded this was just too remote, too inaccessible, and just not worth trying to get the timber out. So this is now just the original sessile oak coppice, probably last coppiced the First World War, I guess. You know, when people went off to war, they never came back, and this kind of thing was completely abandoned. But it was a big industry. The two main products here were tan bark and charcoal, which you probably know. We've come across numerous charcoal platforms in these woods. The bark was stripped off for the tanning industry, and it's difficult to imagine that these woods were heavily managed, and they'd be working on the steepest slopes and down in the deepest combes, and it was an incredible feat to think that this product was so valuable and so important that they'd go to those lengths to get this material out. The other use was there was a trade in pit props. We were talking about how difficult it is to get timber off these places. The problems of getting it up and across the landscape. Well, they didn't bother. They took it that way, put it on a ship, and took it over to the mines in South Wales. So pit props were a major product here. And then there was a reciprocal trade. Limestone was brought back across and slaked in the lime kilns below, and these tracks were then used to take slaked lime up and spread it on the fields above. So it was a very neat, kind of closed, reciprocal local economy, making use of the timber and the resources that were available. And that went on for hundreds of years, across tens of thousands of hectares of sessile oak woodlands in the whole west of Britain. So it was a major industry, and then almost overnight it was pretty much abandoned as we used horses less in our wars and for farming and various other activities, and the whole tanning industry just collapsed. And these have been pretty much abandoned and left unmanaged since then. You'll notice on the right we've cleared an area around one of the planted Scots pine. Somebody was making a point about the Scots pines, and we'll talk about that at the next stop. But this is one of the kind of little picturesque windows out onto the landscape that Ada Lovelace would have developed, and it always intrigues me that this coppice working was probably going on at the same time that Ada Lovelace was trying to develop this picturesque landscape, and it always intrigued me as to what that kind of relationship was like between, with Ada with her money developing all these ideas about new landscape, and the guys and the people working on the hard work on the coppice and charcoal industry, all that kind of going on at the same time. But so you will just see a little viewpoint that we've opened up. These viewpoints were suggested by John Phibbs in his report, and then they were looked at in more detail by Hazel Riley, who did some more detailed surveys of these viewpoints, and she thinks there are structures and platforms that were built, and possibly on this one maybe some steps down to a bit of a platform below, but all that's a bit speculative. We've talked about and again, I'm openly admit I'm kind of straying out of my area of knowledge here ever so slightly. But we've talked about Ada Lovelace and the picturesque landscape and what that meant, and this kind of whole picturesque movement is about a kind of an appreciation of nature and the ruggedness, wild natural conditions, but viewed from a kind of a safe, possibly beautified kind of absolutely, and creating these little vistas out into the wilder landscape, and then also using little visual techniques to lead you to better appreciate some of those views. And we think a lot of those have been deployed here, although they've probably been forgotten about and overlooked. And I'm pretty sure, and backed up by John Phibbs and Hazel Riley, that we, although we're now following a path here, this is now not its original use. And if you can just look back behind you, you can just possibly make out a bit of a curve against that bank. We've excavated through there, and that is quite a deep stone-faced bank. So we think originally the path, which was laid out in the 1830s, 1840s, for some reason took you back into the hill slope slightly, for some reason which might become clear shortly. And we also believe that these yew trees that you see here probably once extended back along where we're currently stood. And we think that the idea behind this was that you would emerge, your view out would be deliberately obscured by these yew trees. You were taken back along this path to avoid seeing something initially, and then you would emerge at a point further along where this kind of grandeur of the landscape was revealed through this little vista that was created to look out onto the Bristol Channel and further beyond. Sadly, that's all been lost because these trees have been felled at some point in the past. The footpath has been cut straight through, and that effect has been lost. But we think here that a lot of those principles of that picturesque landscape just probably were designed into what's going on here. So our plan is to try and reinstate the path following that curve. We would bring that burden, that material back onto here and re-establish some yew trees along this bank and try and recreate that kind of effect. We're trying to kind of recreate some of this effect that the kind of original designers of this landscape would have had in mind.
So Graham, it wouldn't be unlike those tunnels.
No, it would absolutely.
Where you can't see the end, and then you come out and suddenly
precisely,
everything is
exactly,
revealed.
very good. So that's
a
good
natural.
It's a natural trick.
Tunnel,
so that was a that was created. You were taken on a route, on a journey of mystery to have this thing revealed, and that's exactly what's going on here. You were directed away from what would otherwise have been visible, until it could be revealed in a way that
Dramatic.
that was far more dramatic. So we've cut a lot of the trees back down from this slope. I think we've probably gone far enough, but I'd welcome any thoughts whether we need to take another few metres of tree line back to reveal more of that view. I don't know why it's doing that.
Impressed with your reception.
Yeah.
Is that a special sauce?
So yes, it is. So what we also would have at this point, I think even by Ada Lovelace's time, you know, interest in botanical curiosities, you know, people would have understood that things like this tree just behind Oliver here, this is one of our endemic white beans. So I think even they probably wouldn't have fully understood what was going on, but they would have known that these were unusual. These were botanical curiosities. So we've tagged this. This is probably not 180 years old, but it may be growing up from the stump of something that did exist here then. We've also got a strawberry tree planted just behind it. So this is a strawberry tree, which is clearly a Lovelace era planted tree. And then behind us we've got a clump of Scots pine, which are clearly planted. And you can kind of use your imagination. You can almost visualise this kind of rocky outcrop with these old Scots pine on top. That it might just be a little bit like the Caledonian pine forest, and maybe they were trying to introduce that sense of wilderness and wildness from these Scots pine. And somebody's going to have a point to make in a minute, which I'll be very interested to hear. But the chronology and the plant list that we have suggests that in 1840 Scots pine were introduced here, and the Lovelace family had an estate at Ben Damp in Torridon in Scotland, and we believe that these Scots pine may well have been collected from the Torridon estate in Scotland. And I've got a little bit of evidence to back that up, because some years ago, I planted this yesterday as a bit of a prop. So some years ago we had to fell one of these pines, and I've done a ring count here. This is 180 years old, and this takes us right the way back clearly into the Lovelace era. So these, I'm pretty sure, without any genetic evidence, that based on this ring count and based on the documentary evidence we have, that these are indeed trees collected from the Torridon pine forest in the family's estate in Scotland, which is phenomenal. And when we saw some of those chestnut back there, which were 70 years old, which were much bigger than this, obviously, then, you know, it was really, the rings on here are absolutely minute. We had to get a magnifying glass to be able to count them. But it was really nice to have that kind of documentary evidence confirmed with physical evidence of the age of these trees. So I think there's a lot going on here. We've got this kind of picturesque, this manipulation of your route to reveal this wild, rugged landscape. We've also got the kind of botanical curiosities. They've introduced things like the strawberry tree, and then these groups of Scots pine as well. So there's a lot of modification of this landscape to kind of to meet those. It was a fashion, essentially. They wanted to be able to express to their friends and in their society that they were right at the forefront of understanding what the fashions were in design and landscape and those kind of things.